Welcome to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rogers, VP of Business Development at KeyTech. Each month, me and a KeyTecher are going to interview a MedTech leader and talk to them about the critical data-driven decisions they make in their programs. Hey everybody, welcome back to MedTech Speed to Data, KeyTech podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rogers, along with Jake Copperthwaite, Senior EE and partner here at KeyTech. Jake, welcome back.
Hey, Andy, it's good to be with you again.
Yeah, man, it seems like yesterday we did this really interesting interview with Steve Schaefer, CEO of CoolTech. Very impressive guy, as I mentioned. Fundraised billions of dollars with a B, and or transactions with a B. Very experienced gentleman in medtech specifically. One main takeaway I took, from that interview was, he has his why pretty well defined. Med device development, in my mind, is a pretty noble cause to begin with. But the fact that, when I asked him why is he in this business, he had a pretty open shut, explanation with his colleague, who, died of, I believe it was cancer, and, just got the wrong therapy, caught it too late, and, could have saved his life if he had gotten, caught it earlier, obviously, and used the right therapy. So if that's not a why, I don't know what is. And then after that, with his folks. So, always good to interview people and understand, why they're in this business. And also great to see, and hear that the CoolStat platform and the other one, the MyHelper, they're on their way to market. So pretty exciting.
Yeah, and obviously Steve has a ton of experience, and I think we learned a few things from him, that's for sure. So it was great to have him on.
Yeah, and I think, we'll talk a lot about this, here in this episode. I think the main lesson, I learned, certainly we're doing this in our line of work, but just hearing it from the leader of this startup company that's raised millions of dollars is, you have to design these products that are going into trials ultimately right before going to market. You really have to design them with flexibility and thinking about it, as a platform, because inevitably you're going to, work with an outside partner or build the product yourself, design and build your product yourself and put it out in the real world. And, not surprisingly, there's going to be challenges. There's going to be changes that need to be made. And, like he was talking about their nasal cannula, the disposable, having to change the way in which they apply the high flow, low humidity air therapy from in both nostrils and out through the mouth to in one nostril and out the other. That's a pretty significant change in your therapy. He made that pivot successfully. They are making that pivot successfully, but, definitely, in talking with you after that interview, brought up, a couple different areas or I guess ways in which you can, design these products as a platform. So, you really, at the end of the day, you want to design these products where if you need to make a change, you don't have to go back to the drawing board. It's sort of like planning 101 and implementation 101. But I guess, Jake, since you've been at KeyTech for longer than I have, I'm approaching 16 years. You're a year or two ahead of me. I've lost count at this point. But, in your experience, how have you seen products be developed with flexibility in mind broadly, and more specifically, maybe just as a platform so that you can accommodate these changes as they're required?
First of all, you're doing a clinical trial for a reason, and that's because you might not know exactly what you're going to get for data. So you've got to be able to change things on the fly. And you can't spend years or even months doing that. When you think about configurability, the obvious place to start is software. When you design a platform, you got to make sure that you have a process for making software upgrades. Can you do it on site? Can you do it remotely? What sort of testing is needed? How long is it going to take? You need to keep all that in mind. The other thing with software is you need to plan ahead for what might change. So either use configuration files or variables. Make sure that it allows you to adjust those as needed. And when you make those adjustments, you don't want to be introducing new issues. For example, let's say that you increase the flow rate of a device like CoolStat. You don't want to be all of a sudden getting a lot of pressure sensor alarms because of that change. So you need to think ahead when you change something. What's the impact? Have you addressed it? Is it going to be okay? And then finally, with softwares is data logging. You want to get as much data as you can. Even things that you think you might not need, you may decide later it's useful data. So always err on the side of logging more data rather than less. Second area would be electrical. So with electrical design, you want to leave room for changes and upgrades. Things like the power supply. Make sure that you can not only provide enough power for the system at the time, but if you add features to that platform later, will you be able to power those? Things like maybe thermal control. Is your device running hot already? And will it run hotter if you add something new? You want to make sure that you have some overhead there. Another thing you can do is include hooks on your circuit boards for sensors and actuators. If you decide you need to add more sensors, you've already got it built into your circuit board, and then it's really just a matter of plugging them in. The last area would be mechanical. I think to build a platform, you want to think about modularity. So, can you change parts of the hardware without impacting the entire device? Can you take a module, swap in a new one, and get the functionality that you need from that new module? And I think Steve had a good example of that, where he was able to change only the tube set to adapt the way that the air was reaching the user's nostrils, as opposed to changing the entire system, including the hardware. And then lastly, you want to be thinking about serviceability. So with a platform, if you're gonna need to change it, you want to be able to open it up, get in there, change components, swap things out without damaging anything or without having a hard time putting it back together. So you want to think about avoiding things like glues and other mechanisms that would prevent serviceability and excess.
Yeah, those are great points, Jake. And I would add, it's a little bit harder to sort of give concrete examples, but from a user perspective, before you get into a trial, you're going to do pre-formative evaluations, and you're going to put different product anatomies in front of potential end users and let them tell you what the ideal product architecture and use case should be, so that when you get in the trial, your changes are very technical or related to the actual therapy you're applying, and not how a user puts on a mask or loads up a GUI or engages with a GUI. You want to lock that in early while the costs are low by doing your pre-formative evaluations and doing them thoroughly. Any other areas, Jake?
I guess another thing to think about is whenever you're designing a platform and you're trying to include flexibility, you've got to think, what's the extra effort? There's pros and cons of everything. You can't have it all. So if you're designing in these extra hooks on your circuit boards, if you're making sure that your software is easily reconfigured, it's going to take some extra effort. So you're going to spend that time up front to get that stuff right, but it's going to pay dividends down the road. It's way more difficult to make those changes later on if you haven't built those hooks in originally. So I think at KeyTech, we would always recommend making sure that you've planned ahead when you're doing the design early.
The CoolStat is a great example of developing a product as a platform so that you can make pivots along the way. The therapy was changed, the consumable changed slightly, and they were able to make those changes and kind of keep going with the trial. Another kind of more extreme example we'll talk about in the next episode is how the CoolStat platform was used as a means to conduct a trial for a completely different therapy. This is for migraines for their MyHelper platform. So we'll get into that in another episode. So for now, Jake, thanks for joining the interview and this post-show chat, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
Thanks a lot, Andy. We'll talk again in a bit.
Thanks for tuning in to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. Join us each month for more ways to get the right data faster to inform critical decisions. Find additional resources on our website, keytechinc.com. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and please leave a review on iTunes whenever you listen. Thanks.